Now we have a cuisine route defined, but we currently do not have a controller that will respond to this request. So if I put in cuisine/French, then we'll get a HTTP 404 error, couldn't find the resource that you're looking for. Let's fix this problem by right-clicking on the controllers folder, selecting Add Controller, and I'm going to call this the Cuisine Controller. When I click Add, Visual Studio will automatically give me a Cuisine Controller class. It's derived from the correct base class. It has an index action inside. If we do a build and we refresh this page, we're still going to have a 404 error because remember, the routing engine is passing along action equal to search. That's the default. There's also no way to specify it in the URL. So we're going to need a search action inside of this controller before we can get any further. We also do not have a view as yet. So instead of returning a view, I'm going to just return some content. With content, I can just pass in a string like, you have reached the cuisine controller. And this string is sent directly to the client's browser. There is no HTML involved, there is no view involved, but if we refresh this, we should be able to see you have reached the cuisine controller. This is good. Now let's see if we can get a hold of the name parameter that's in the URL. And let me just point out before I do that actions are nothing more than public methods inside of a controller-derived class. Anytime you add a public method to this class, or any controller class, you have to think about it as something that will be URL addressable. If someone types the right thing into their browser address bar, they will be able to invoke this method. So with that in mind, let's see if we can pull out the name that's being passed to us. As I demonstrated earlier, we can always go up to routeData.values and ask for the thing called name. But it turns out the MVC framework makes this even easier. If we add a parameter to our controller action, the MVC framework will do everything it can to populate that parameter with a value it finds somewhere in the request. So if we have this parameter called name, the MVC framework will look in the routing data, it will look in the query string, and it will look in posted form values to find something called name. And in the case of /cuisine/French, it will find a value for the name in the routing data and pass in that value French. Let's take that value and echo it back by writing it out in our content. But before I do that, I want to make sure that the value is properly encoded. So I'm going to say name equals server, which is a property I have here on my controller. Please HTML encode that name for me. And then we'll write out that name in the content. The reason I'm doing this is because before, when we were writing out routing values into a view, the Razor View Engine will automatically HTML encode the output for us. In this case, we're using a content result, which does not automatically HTML encode the string. And even for this simple example, I want to make sure we are safe. Since this name parameter will contain user input, someone could tell us that they are looking for a cuisine called script type equals text/JavaScript, which it turns out is not something you eat, but it would be a way for a malicious user to launch a cross-site scripting attack via our application. So with this code in place, let's do a build. And let's refresh. And you can see that we have French coming in as the cuisine name. Currently, our route is defined such that if I do not pass this name parameter, we will not find a match. But we can change this. Let's go back into the map route call and set name equals URL parameter dot optional. And after I do a build, I can come out and refresh. And you can see now we can render the cuisine search action. It's just that we do not get a name parameter. Now, just to show you that the MVC framework is looking around in different places for something called name, let's actually enter a query string variable, name equals German. And you can see that German gets passed into our controller action. So even though the routing engine didn't find a name in the URL, the MVC framework found a name parameter in the query string and was able to pass that in. Well, let's go back to the case where we are not passing a cuisine name and try to answer this question. What if we want a default value here? How could we specify it? Well, one way to do that would be actually to say name equals and then some default parameter, some string value that's inside of this anonymously typed C# object. But another way to do that is to make it a little closer to home and use a feature of C# 4.0, which allows us to specify a default value for this parameter. So we could say, if no one passes us a string, please use this compile time constant, which is just an asterisk or a star, and pass that in instead. Essentially what we're thinking we'll do is we'll just search for everything if the user doesn't give us a cuisine. So let me do a quick build and come out and refresh this page. We're just hitting /cuisine and notice that we get that default parameter value into our controller action. So there are several different ways that we can get data into a controller action. The easiest approach is just to give the action method a parameter and let the MVC framework find a value for it. Again, it will look for values in routing data, in the query string, and posted form values. As we move further along in this course, we'll see more advanced scenarios involving multiple action parameters and even see complex types being passed in with multiple properties, using those as parameters.